They were told that capture meant dishonor worse than death. But when 300 Japanese women stepped off crowded transport trucks at Camp Lordsburg, New Mexico on August 28, 1945, they expected American soldiers to laugh at their shame and Japanese officers to command their silence. Instead, something impossible happened. When their own commanders raised their fists to enforce obedience, American guards stepped between them. The women wept not from pain, but from confusion. For the first time in their lives, the enemy became their protectors, and nothing in their training had prepared them for that. If you want to hear more untold stories from World War II, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. These hidden moments of history deserve to be remembered. The summer heat of New Mexico hit them like a wall. After 3 weeks on a cramped transport ship from Manila, then 5 days on a sweltering train, the women finally arrived at a camp surrounded by endless desert. The landscape looked like another planet, flat brown hostile. The Pyramid Mountains rose in the distance like jagged teeth against a burning sky. There were no trees, no green fields, just dust and rocks and the smell of hot metal from the train tracks. The temperature that afternoon reached 104 degrees. The air shimmered with heat. Dust devils twisted across the desert floor. The women wore simple cotton uniforms, some torn from the journey. Their hair was tied back in tight buns, faces sunburned and streaked with sweat. Most were young, between 18 and 30, though a few older women stood among them. They had been nurses, clerks, radio operators, and translators working for the Japanese military across the Pacific Islands. When the war ended suddenly 2 weeks earlier, with Emperor Hirohito's August 15th broadcast, they found themselves prisoners, not heroes. As the trucks rolled through the camp gates, barbed wire glinted in the sun. Guard towers stood at each corner, and long wooden barracks stretched in neat rows. American soldiers watched them arrive, rifles resting on their shoulders. Some looked curious, others looked bored. None looked cruel, which confused the women more than anything. The dust tasted bitter on their tongues. The air smelled different here, dry, clean, without the humidity of the Pacific Islands or the smoke of war. As they climbed down from the trucks, their legs wobbled. Some had to hold on to each other to stay upright. The ground beneath their feet felt strange and solid after weeks at sea. American voices rang out, giving orders in English. The sounds were harsh and unfamiliar. A few women understood some English, but most heard only noise. They stood in tight groups, shoulder to shoulder, drawing comfort from being close. Then they saw them, the Japanese officers. 6 men stood near a separate building, and also prisoners, but wearing what remained of their uniforms with stiff pride. The women's hearts sank. Even here, even in captivity, the hierarchy remained. The commanders' faces were hard as stone. One of them, a lieutenant with a thick mustache and a shrapnel scar across his neck, scanned the women with cold eyes. Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto, age 38, career military officer, captured when Manila fell in February. The women knew that look. It meant obedience. It meant silence. It meant shame if they failed. Rin Nakamura, a 24-year-old who had worked as a translator in Manila, felt her throat tighten. She was slender like all of them after months of poor rations, but her eyes were sharp, observant, missing nothing. She whispered to the woman next to her in Japanese, "They are here. The commanders are watching us. Then we must not bring dishonor." The other woman replied, her voice barely audible. Around them, whispers spread like wind through grass. "Stand straight. Do not cry. Remember who we are." They had been taught since childhood that capture was the ultimate shame. A true Japanese soldier, they were told, died before surrendering. But the war ended so suddenly, the emperor himself had spoken of peace. And now they were here, alive but dishonored. An American officer approached holding a clipboard. He was young, maybe 30, with tired eyes but a kind face. He spoke slowly, using simple words. A Japanese-American translator stood beside him, repeating everything in their language. "You will be safe here. You will be fed and given shelter. You will be treated according to international law. The Geneva Convention protects all prisoners of war." Safe. The word felt foreign. They had been told Americans were demons who showed no mercy. Yet here was this man speaking gently, promising safety. But then Lieutenant Yamamoto stepped forward. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "You will maintain discipline. You will obey. You will not embarrass our nation further." The women's heads dropped immediately. Yes, they understood. They were prisoners, but they were still Japanese. They still had to obey. Even if everything else had fallen apart, that remained. The American guards directed the women toward a large building. Inside, it was cooler with fans spinning lazily on the ceiling. The women were told to line up. One by one, they would be checked by doctors, given clean clothes, and assigned to barracks. Rin's heart pounded. She had heard stories, terrible stories, about what happened to captured women. The propaganda had been clear. Americans would humiliate them, hurt them, use them. She clenched her fists, trying to stay calm. When her turn came, she entered a small room. An American nurse stood there. A woman with red hair and freckles. She smiled. Rin froze. Why was she smiling? Through the translator, the nurse spoke. I'm going to check your health. Just basic things. Temperature, weight, any injuries. Is that okay? Is that okay? No one had ever asked Rin if something was okay. In the Japanese military system, you obeyed. You didn't get asked. She nodded, unsure what else to do. The nurse was gentle. She checked Rin's pulse, looked at her eyes, asked if she had any pain. When she noticed old bruises on Rin's arms, marks from when Commander Yamamoto had grabbed her roughly months earlier for a mistaken translation, the nurse's smile faded. Did someone hurt you? She asked through the translator. Rin said nothing. How could she explain? In her world, that was just discipline. That was normal. The nurse wrote something on her chart, then handed Rin a bundle of clothes. A simple dress, undergarments, and a pair of shoes. These are for you. You can change in the next room. Take your time. Take your time, another strange phrase. Rin had never been told to take her time. She had only been told to hurry, to be efficient, to never waste a moment. Outside, the other women went through similar experiences. Most were silent, moving like robots, doing exactly what they were told. But inside, confusion swirled. The Americans were not cruel. They were not rough. They asked questions instead of giving orders. It made no sense. After processing, the women were led to a dining hall. Long tables filled the room, and the smell of food, real food, hit them immediately. For months, they had eaten rice mixed with weeds, thin soup, sometimes fish if they were lucky. They had watched their portions shrink as supply lines broke down. Many had lost weight, their uniforms hanging loose on thin frames. Now they saw tables covered with trays. There was rice, yes, but also vegetables, roasted chicken with crispy golden skin, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread with real butter, and pitchers of cold milk. Apples sat in bowls shining red. The sight was overwhelming. An American cook, a large woman with a friendly face and an apron that said Betty Lou's Kitchen, gestured for them to take plates. Help yourselves, girls. Y'all must be starving. Take as much as you want. There's plenty. The women looked at each other, uncertain. Was this a test? Were they supposed to refuse to show discipline? Or were they really allowed to eat it slowly? One woman stepped forward, then another. Soon they formed a line, taking plates with trembling hands. When Rin received her tray, heavy with food, she nearly dropped it. The weight alone shocked her. This was more than she had eaten in a week back on the islands. She found a seat at one of the long tables. The other women sat in silence, as they had been trained to do. No talking during meals, no wasting food, no showing emotion. Rin picked up her fork. They had been given real utensils, not just chopsticks or fingers. She took a small bite of the chicken. It was warm, seasoned with pepper and herbs tender enough to fall apart. Her eyes watered. She couldn't stop the tears. Around her, other women reacted the same way. Some cried quietly into their food. Others ate mechanically, as if afraid the plates would be taken away. One older woman, who had been a nurse, whispered a prayer of thanks under her breath. For 10 minutes, there was only the sound of forks on plates, quiet sniffles, and 300 women trying to process the impossible. The enemy was feeding them better than their own military ever had. But then came footsteps. Heavy boots on wood floors. The Japanese officers entered the dining hall. The women immediately stiffened. Forks paused midair. Heads bowed lower. Lieutenant Yamamoto walked between the tables, his face a mask of disgust. He spoke in harsh Japanese that the American guards couldn't understand, but every woman felt in her bones. Look at yourselves. You eat their food and forget your honor. You accept comfort from the enemy while your families starve in the ruins of Japan. You smile at American soldiers while our brothers lie dead across the Pacific. Have you no shame? The room fell completely silent. Several women set down their forks. Their appetites vanished. Guilt crashed over them like a wave. He was right, wasn't he? They were eating enemy food. They were accepting kindness from Americans. They were prisoners, disgraced, and now they were betraying their country further by not resisting. Rin felt tears slide down her cheeks, not from joy at the food now, but from shame. Her throat tightened. She couldn't swallow. You gorge on enemy food while your mothers pick through rubble for scraps. Yamamoto continued, his voice rising. You sit in comfort while children starve. You have forgotten who you are. You have become animals who chose survival over dignity. He stopped behind the youngest girl in the room. Sakura Yoshida, only 19 years old, baby-faced with bright eyes that still held some innocence despite the war. She had been a radio operator on Saipan before the island fell. This girl, Yamamoto said, his voice dripping with contempt. This child was heard humming earlier today, an American song. While Japan burns, she entertains herself with enemy music. Sakura's face went white. She hadn't realized anyone had heard her humming Don't Fence Me In while helping in the kitchen that afternoon. It had just slipped out, a melody she'd heard on the radio. Stand, Yamamoto commanded. Sakura stood, her whole body trembling. You will remember your place, Yamamoto said, addressing all the women now. You will stop fraternizing with the Americans. You will maintain dignity and discipline, or I will ensure you understand the meaning of shame. Tomorrow morning we will discuss proper behavior. Those who have embraced American charity too eagerly will be corrected. Corrected. The word hung in the air like a threat. Everyone knew what it meant. Public punishment, humiliation, physical discipline. They had all seen it before in the Japanese military. After he dismissed them, the women walked to their barracks in silence. The joy they had started to feel, the small happiness of being safe and fed, evaporated. They were back in the familiar cage of obligation and honor, even if the bars were invisible. 30 yards away, Sergeant James Miller stood watching through a window. He was 28 years old, average height, with dark hair and eyes that carried the weight of too much war. He had been assigned to Camp Lordsburg 3 months earlier. He'd expected to guard dangerous enemy combatants. Instead, he was watching women cry over a hot meal and then cry again from shame. Sarge Private David Johnson said beside him, They look so scared. They were told we'd torture them, Miller said quietly. Propaganda painted us as demons. Now they're realizing it was all lies. That's got to mess with your head, finding out your enemy is kinder than your own people. But Miller understood something the other guards didn't. He'd seen this kind of fear before. Not the fear of physical pain, but something deeper. The fear of being seen as unworthy by your own people. The fear that survival itself could be a crime. He kept those thoughts to himself. Some knowledge came from places too personal to share in a guard tower at midnight. Something's not right, Johnson said. That Japanese officer just said something to them, and they all looked terrified. I noticed, Miller replied. We need to watch this closely. Those officers don't have official authority here, but they've got cultural authority. That might be even more powerful. Should we report it to Captain Edwards? Let's see what happens tomorrow. But keep your eyes open. If those officers try anything, we intervene. That night, the women were taken to their barracks, long wooden buildings with rows of beds. Each bed had a mattress, a pillow, and 2 blankets. After sleeping on hard ground, on crowded ships, on anything they could find, for months, the sight of real beds felt like a dream. But the Japanese officers were housed in a nearby building, and their voices carried in the desert night. The women lay in their beds exhausted, but unable to sleep. Through the thin walls, they heard the commanders arguing among themselves, discussing the disgrace of surrender, the weakness of accepting American charity. One voice rose above the others. Yamamoto, tomorrow we will make sure they understand. They may be prisoners, but they are still Japanese. They will maintain honor, or they will be reminded of their duty. The threat hung in the air. The women knew what reminded meant. It meant punishment. It meant being pulled aside and corrected, or worse. Even in captivity, the hierarchy held. The commander still had power over them, not through official authority, but through culture, through shame, through the weight of everything they had been taught since birth. Rin stared at the ceiling, watching shadows from the guard tower, lights move across the wooden beams. Her stomach was full for the first time in months. She was clean. They had been allowed to shower with real soap and warm water. She was lying on a soft bed, and yet she had never felt more conflicted. "Are you awake?" whispered the woman in the next bed. Her name was Yuki Tanaka, 22 years old, a former clerk from Tokyo who'd been stationed at Rabaul. She was small, gentle, fearful. A rule follower who'd never questioned authority in her life. "Yes," Rin whispered back. "Do you think we are betraying our country by being here?" Rin didn't answer right away. How could she? Everything she believed was being challenged. The Americans were supposed to be monsters, but they had been kind. The commanders were supposed to protect them, but they made them feel ashamed for surviving. "I don't know," Rin finally said. "I don't know anything anymore." Yuki was quiet for a moment, then she said something that would stay with Rin forever. "The nurse gave me medicine today for an infection I've had for weeks. No one in our unit had medicine to give me, but the enemy did. They gave it to me without asking anything in return." What does that make them? The simple truth of that statement settled over them both. The enemy had medicine. The enemy had food. The enemy had asked if they were okay. And their own commanders only offered shame. Outside, the desert wind whispered against the barracks. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The women lay awake, caught between two worlds. The one they had known, where obedience and honor were everything, and this new one where the enemy showed unexpected mercy. Neither world made sense anymore. From another bed, Hana Watanabe spoke into the darkness. Hana was 29, the oldest of their small group. She'd been a military nurse who served in field hospitals across the Pacific. Maternal, protective, pragmatic. She'd seen things that aged her beyond her years. "I need to say something," Hana whispered. "I was a nurse. I watched our commanders refuse to use captured American medical supplies because they said it would dishonor the men to be healed by enemy medicine. So men died, from simple infections, from preventable diseases. They died in agony because we called it honor. But honor didn't save them. It just killed them slowly." The words hung in the darkness like an accusation. Then Sakura spoke, the youngest among them. Her voice was small, almost childlike. "What will Yamamoto do tomorrow?" No one answered. They all knew. Public humiliation, kneeling for hours in the sun, verbal abuse, physical punishment if the Americans weren't watching carefully enough. "I don't want to die," Sakura whispered. "Is that shameful? Am I wrong for wanting to live?" The question had no answer, or rather, it had two answers depending on which world you believed in. The old world said yes, survival at the cost of honor was shameful. The new world, the one the Americans represented, said no life itself had value. Rin pulled out a small notebook she'd hidden under her mattress. She wrote by the dim light that came through the windows from the guard towers. She'd kept this diary secretly for months, knowing that the thoughts she wrote were dangerous. August 28, 1945, Camp Lordsburg, New Mexico. "I don't know who I am anymore. For 24 years, I knew exactly. Japanese woman, obedient daughter, faithful servant of the emperor, translator for the Imperial Army. Now I am a prisoner. The enemy treats me better than my own commanders did. American nurse asked if I was okay, asked permission to examine me, gave me clean clothes and said, 'Take your time.' No one in Japanese military ever asked if I was okay. They ordered, I obeyed. That was the system. But today I ate more food than I've eaten in weeks. I slept in a real bed. I was given soap and clean water for a shower. And Lieutenant Yamamoto called me an animal, which is the betrayal. Accepting kindness from enemies or rejecting it to preserve honor. Mother used to say, 'Serve with honor, never bring shame to our family.' But mother is dead. Our city is ashes. My sister Fumiko is missing. Japan surrendered. What is honor now? Starving to prove loyalty, refusing medicine to show devotion, or is honor simply surviving, living to see my family again? I don't have answers. I don't think anyone does anymore. Tomorrow Yamamoto will correct us. I know what that means. I've seen it before. But the Americans said we're under their protection. Can they protect us from shame, from culture, from our own souls? I'm more afraid of Yamamoto's words than I ever was of American bombs. Because bombs only kill your body. Shame kills something deeper. She closed the notebook and hid it again. Around her, the barracks had fallen silent except for quiet breathing and the occasional sniffle of someone crying into their pillow. In the guard tower, Sergeant Miller stood watch with Private Chen, a Chinese-American soldier whose family had fled Japanese invasion of Manchuria. Chen understood things about Asian culture that most American soldiers didn't. You see how they reacted when those Japanese officers walked in, Miller said. Pure terror. I recognize that fear, Chen replied. My parents had it. Fear of shame, fear of dishonoring ancestors. It's not fear of being hurt. It's fear of being seen as unworthy by your own people. Miller was quiet for a moment, watching the barracks where the women lay awake. Then he said, I've seen this before. People torn between two identities. It's not just about physical survival. It's about who you're allowed to be. Chen nodded. My family fled Manchuria when I was 5. We came to America as refugees. My parents spent the rest of their lives caught between Chinese tradition and American life, never fully trusted by either side. I understand what these women are going through. That's why we have to protect them, Miller said. Not just from physical harm, but from being crushed by shame, from being told their survival is a betrayal. Chen nodded. Those officers are going to hurt them. Not physically, maybe not where we can see, but psychologically, through shame, through cultural pressure. Can we stop that? Miller asked. We can try. But first we need to understand what we're dealing with. This isn't just prisoner-guard dynamics. This is a war for these women's souls. And we're right in the middle of it. In the officer-separated building, Yamamoto sat with his fellow commanders. They drank weak tea salvaged from their belongings. The women are already corrupted, said Lieutenant Sato. They eat American food, accept American medicine, smile at American guards. They've forgotten Japanese values, another officer agreed. Yamamoto's voice was cold as winter steel. Then we will remind them. Tomorrow morning we conduct an honor restoration ceremony. Public, visible. The Americans won't understand what we're doing until it's too late. We identify the 3 worst offenders, make examples of them, force them to kneel, to confess dishonor, to recommit to Japanese principles. What if the Americans interfere, then we expose them for what they are? Cultural imperialists who destroy Japanese identity under the guise of protection. Either way, we win. Yamamoto stared out the window toward the women's barracks. They think American kindness has freed them. They don't understand. Kindness is the most insidious prison. It makes you forget who you are. It makes you grateful to your captors. Tomorrow I break that prison, and I remind them that Japanese identity is stronger than American charity. Shame is more powerful than comfort. By the time I'm done, they'll beg to return to proper Japanese discipline. The stage was set. 300 women lay in comfortable beds, stomachs full, bodies clean, more physically secure than they'd been in months, but also more confused, more torn, more terrified, because physical safety is easy to accept. But psychological safety, the kind that requires abandoning everything you were taught about who you're supposed to be, that's a different kind of war. And tomorrow morning, that war would begin in earnest. When your enemy offers protection and your own people offer only shame, which do you choose? And what does it cost you either way? The answer would come with the sunrise in a confrontation that would change everything these women believed about honor, loyalty, and what it truly means to be free. Dawn broke over the New Mexico desert like a blade sharp and unforgiving. September 1st, 1945. 6 o'clock in the morning, and already the air carried the promise of brutal heat. The women of Camp Lordsburg woke to the bell, made their beds with military precision, and lined up outside the barracks. They had slept poorly, haunted by Yamamoto's threat. Today, they knew something would break. American guards did their morning count, then led the women to breakfast. The dining hall smelled of coffee and oatmeal, toast and butter. But the women barely noticed. They ate in silence, eyes down, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It fell at 7 o'clock. Lieutenant Yamamoto and his officers appeared at the entrance to the dining hall. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet despite the desert heat outside. 300 women froze mid-bite. Yamamoto didn't enter. He simply stood there, his scarred neck visible even from a distance, and spoke one word in Japanese: assembly. The women rose as one, abandoning their breakfasts, and filed outside into the yard. The sun was climbing fast. The dust was already rising in small eddies around their feet. American guards watched from their positions along the fence line, sensing tension, but not understanding its source. Captain Richard Edwards stood near the command building, arms crossed. He was 42 years old, a career officer who'd seen action in North Africa and France. He'd been at Camp Lordsburg for 8 months overseeing German POWs before the Japanese women arrived. Something about this morning felt wrong. The air was too still. The women were too quiet. Sergeant Miller approached him. "Sir, the Japanese officers called an assembly. They're gathering all the women in the yard." "Did we authorize this?" Edwards asked. "It's within their rights under Geneva Convention," Miller said. "Cultural gatherings are permitted. But I don't like it, sir. Yamamoto's planning something." Edwards nodded. "We watch. We don't interfere unless there's a clear violation. But keep the guards alert." The women formed neat rows in the yard. Yamamoto and his 5 officers stood on a slight rise, giving them elevation, giving them authority. The visual was deliberate, the powerful looking down on the powerless. Yamamoto began to speak in Japanese. His voice carried across the silent assembly, each word chosen for maximum impact. "My countrywomen, we stand together one final time before we discuss proper conduct for our return to Japan. I wish to prepare you for what awaits." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "Japan is broken. Our cities are ruins. Our people starve. American occupation forces control our streets. In this chaos, Japanese society will seek order, will demand accountability. The question every survivor will face is this: how did you survive? What did you sacrifice? Whom did you betray?" Several women shifted uncomfortably. Rin felt her heart begin to race. She knew where this was going. "I have documented everything." Yamamoto continued, his voice hardening. "I have recorded names. I know which women accepted American charity too eagerly. Which ones learned English? Which ones smiled at enemy soldiers? Which ones forgot their families to enjoy comfort? When we return to Japan, I will provide this documentation to proper authorities. There will be investigations, tribunals for collaborators." The word collaborators landed like a bomb. Women gasped. Some began to cry silently. Collaboration during wartime was a serious charge. People had been executed for less. "But there is a path to redemption," Yamamoto said, his tone shifting to something that might have been mistaken for kindness if you didn't listen carefully. "Those who publicly recommit to Japanese values, who renounce American influence, who demonstrate genuine remorse, they may be spared judgment." He let that sink in for a long moment. "I ask now, which women will step forward and renounce their acceptance of American charity? Who will declare their loyalty to Japanese values? Who will choose honor over comfort?" The silence was absolute. 300 women stood frozen, caught between fear and something new. Something that hadn't fully formed yet, but was growing stronger each day. The desire to say no. Then one woman stepped forward. She was in her 40s, very traditional, terrified of what awaited her in Japan. She knelt before Yamamoto and bowed deeply. "I renounce my weakness," she said, her voice shaking. "I accepted enemy food when I should have fasted in solidarity with my starving family. I am ashamed. I will restore my honor." Yamamoto nodded approvingly. "Good. Who else?" Several other women started to move forward, pushed by fear, by cultural conditioning, by the weight of 20 or 30 or 40 years of being taught that obedience to male authority was the only path. But then Sakura Yoshida spoke. The youngest woman in the camp, only 19 years old, the girl who'd been singled out the day before for humming an American song. She stood in the 3rd row, small and trembling, but she spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "No." The word echoed across the yard like a gunshot. Everyone turned. Yamamoto's eyes narrowed. The other officers looked shocked. The women held their breath. American guards leaned forward, sensing a shift but not understanding the language. "What did you say?" Yamamoto asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Sakura swallowed hard. Her voice shook, but she said it again, louder this time. "No, I won't renounce them. The Americans saved my life. Nurse Clara treated my wounds. Betty Lou fed me. Sergeant Miller protected me when you tried to hit me. I won't call that shameful." Yamamoto took 3 steps toward her. "You are 19 years old, a child. You don't understand consequences. You don't understand what awaits you in Japan if you defy me now." But before he could say more, another woman stood. Yuki Tanaka, 22 years old. The clerk from Tokyo who'd been so fearful, so traditional, so obedient. She'd been the one most likely to comply with Yamamoto's demands. Yet now she stood beside Sakura. "I won't renounce them either." Yuki said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. Dr. Hayes saved my life. I was dying from infection. My leg was septic. In Japanese service, they told me to endure that suffering built character. But Dr. Hayes operated on me. He gave me penicillin. He spent 2 hours saving my life. That's not collaboration. That's mercy. I won't call mercy shameful. Then Hana Watanabe stood, 29 years old, the nurse who'd seen too much death. I watched our commanders let men die when medicine could have saved them. I watched them refuse captured American medical supplies because using enemy medicine would dishonor the men. So the men died in agony. They died for pride, not for honor. The Americans didn't let us die. They treated us like human beings. That's not weakness. That's strength. And then Rin Nakamura stood, the translator, the educated woman who'd spent months swallowing her questions, her doubts, her growing certainty that something in the system was deeply wrong. She stood and felt something break inside her. Not something painful, something liberating. Lieutenant Yamamoto, she said, and her voice was steady now, clear and strong. You say we forgot honor, but I think we learned what honor really means. Honor isn't making people suffer to prove loyalty. Honor isn't kneeling on rocks in the desert to demonstrate obedience. Honor isn't dying when you could live. The Americans showed us honor through action. They fed the hungry. They healed the sick. They protected the vulnerable. They asked if we were okay. They treated us with dignity when our own commanders treated us with contempt. That's real honor. And I won't denounce it to satisfy your version of honor, which is just cruelty wearing a mask. The yard was silent except for the wind. Yamamoto's face turned purple with rage. His hand came up, fingers curled into a fist, and he took 2 quick steps toward Rin. You dare, he hissed. You dare speak to me this way. You will be corrected. You will learn your place. His arm drew back to strike, but he never completed the motion. Sergeant James Miller was already moving. He'd been watching the assembly with Private Chen translating quietly beside him. The moment Yamamoto's body language shifted toward violence, Miller was in motion. He crossed 30 yards in seconds, stepped between Yamamoto and Rin, and his hand went to his sidearm. Stop, Miller said. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Step away from her, now. Yamamoto turned his fury on Miller. This is not your concern. She is Japanese. I am her superior officer. You have no authority over our internal discipline. You're a prisoner, Miller said flatly. Same as her. And in this camp, prisoners don't strike other prisoners. You don't get to enforce discipline through violence. You don't get to terrorize these women because they're starting to realize they deserve better than what you gave them. Miller's hand stayed on his weapon. Behind him, 4 more American guards were arriving at a run. Captain Edwards was crossing the yard with purpose in his stride. Lieutenant Yamamoto Edwards said as he arrived, speaking through Private Chen, who translated rapidly. I'm going to explain something to you once and once only. You are a prisoner of war in an American military facility. Under the Geneva Convention, you have certain rights. Adequate food, shelter, medical care, humane treatment. What you do not have is authority over other prisoners. You do not have the right to enforce discipline. You do not have the right to physically punish anyone. You do not have the right to psychologically torture these women through shame and intimidation. These women are under the protection of the United States military, under my protection. If you attempt to harm them again, physically or psychologically, you and your officers will be placed in isolated confinement away from the general population. Do you understand? Yamamoto's response came in English, surprising everyone. His accent was thick, but his words were clear. You understand nothing of honor, Captain. These women need discipline or they lose their souls. I try to save them from eternal shame. You prevent this. You corrupt them with American ideas about individual freedom and personal choice. You destroy what makes them Japanese. In America, Edwards said, we believe honor comes from protecting people, not punishing them. We believe dignity is a right, not a privilege you earn through suffering. He gestured to the guards. Sergeant Miller escort Lieutenant Yamamoto and the other Japanese officers to Block C. As of this moment, they're restricted from group contact with the women prisoners. All future interactions require American supervision. They'll be housed separately. This is cultural oppression, Yamamoto said, but he was being led away now. You separate us from our countrywomen. You force American values on them. This is not protection. This is colonization. As the guards moved him toward the separate building, Yamamoto called back to the women in Japanese. His voice carried across the yard like poison. Remember this day. Remember who protected you from honor and who tried to preserve it. When you return to Japan, American soldiers won't be there to save you. But I will be, and so will Japanese justice. Every one of you will answer for this. The women stood frozen watching him go. The threat was clear and credible. Yamamoto would return to Japan ahead of them. He would file his reports. He would testify, and they would face consequences. But something had changed. 4 women had stood up to him. 4 women had said no, and the Americans had backed them. For the first time since their capture, the women had seen their own power. Captain Edwards addressed the assembly. Through Private Chen, he said, "Ladies, I want you to understand something clearly. What just happened was not acceptable. No one has the right to hurt you. Not physically, not psychologically. Not Japanese officers, not American guards, not anyone. You are prisoners of war, that's true. But you're also human beings entitled to basic respect and dignity. Lieutenant Yamamoto's version of honor involved making you suffer. That's not honor by any reasonable definition. That's abuse. You're safe here. Really safe, not just from us, but from them. From anyone who tries to control you through fear and shame. That's a promise." The women were taken to the infirmary. Sakura, Yuki, and Rin needed to be checked after the confrontation. Nurse Clara Mitchell was waiting with cool cloths and water and her gentle southern kindness. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart," she said to Sakura as she checked her pulse and blood pressure. "You were very brave out there. Standing up like that takes real courage." Through Rin's translation, Sakura asked the question that was burning in her mind. "Why do you help me? Japan killed your son at Tarawa. I saw his picture on your desk. Why don't you hate me?" Clara's hands never stopped working, checking Sakura's scraped knees from where she'd knelt the day before, applying antiseptic gently. "My son died in war. That's the military's fault. Government's fault, not yours. You're just a girl who got caught up in something bigger than any of us. I'm not going to punish you for that. That wouldn't honor his memory. It would just create more suffering, and Lord knows there's been enough of that." Sakura started crying, not from pain, from the impossibility of processing this kindness from someone who had every reason to hate her. "I was told Americans are monsters," she said through her tears. "We were told Japanese were monsters too," Clara replied softly. "Turns out propaganda lies to everyone. We're just people trying to survive terrible times." Later that day, Captain Edwards called Rin to his office. Sergeant Miller was there too. Edwards wanted a full account of what Yamamoto had said, what he'd threatened, what his plans were. Rin translated everything as accurately as she could. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then Miller spoke. "Rin, can I tell you something personal?" She nodded, uncertain. "My mother was Japanese. Yoshiko Tanaka from Hiroshima. She came to America in 1920 to marry my father. She loved this country, but she never stopped being Japanese in her heart." Rin's eyes widened with surprise. "When Pearl Harbor happened," Miller continued, "the government put Japanese Americans in internment camps. My father's military service protected our immediate family, but my mother's parents, her siblings, her cousins, they all went to Manzanar. They were imprisoned by America just for being Japanese. They hadn't done anything wrong. They were just Japanese in America at the wrong time." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I visited them there once. I saw them living behind barbed wire, eating in mess halls, sleeping in barracks. I saw what shame and fear did to them. They were torn between 2 identities, fully trusted by neither side. My mother spent the rest of her life carrying both countries in her heart. She died, never feeling fully at home anywhere." "Why are you telling me this?" Ren asked. "Because I see the same thing happening to you," Miller said. "You're being changed by this experience. You can't undo it. Whether you stay here or return to Japan, you'll carry both worlds inside you now. You'll understand both Japanese honor and American dignity, both cultural tradition and individual choice." "That sounds like torture," Rin said quietly, "being split between 2 worlds." "My mother told me once that it was a gift," Miller said. "She said I am not Japanese or American. I am both. I am a bridge between 2 worlds. That's my purpose. Not to choose one and reject the other, but to carry both and enrich both." He looked at her directly. "Maybe that's what you're becoming too. A bridge. And maybe Japan needs bridges right now more than it needs people who cling to the old ways that led to this war in the first place. That evening, word had spread through the camp about what happened. The women gathered in small groups, talking in whispers at first, then gradually louder. The fear was still there. Yamamoto's threats were real and credible. But something else was there too. Hope, possibility, the radical idea that maybe they didn't have to accept shame as their destiny. In the dining hall that night, Betty Lou Jenkins made something special. She'd asked Sakura to help her. Together they made biscuits from scratch, real Southern-style biscuits with buttermilk and lard and white gravy, thick with sausage and black pepper. Now, honey, Betty Lou said as they worked, the secret to good biscuits is keeping everything cold. Cold butter, cold milk, cold hands even. You work it fast and gentle. Don't overwork the dough or they'll be tough. Sakura's hands were covered in flour. She'd never baked like this before. In Japan, bread was Western, not traditional. But there was something deeply satisfying about the work about creating something warm and nourishing with your own hands. The biscuits came out of the oven, golden and fluffy. Betty Lou split one open, steam rising, and slathered it with butter. Then she poured gravy over the top. Here, baby, she said, handing it to Sakura. Try this. Sakura took a bite. The biscuit melted in her mouth, buttery and rich. The gravy was savory and peppery and comforting in a way she'd never experienced. Tears started flowing down her cheeks. What's wrong? Betty Lou asked with a concern. Too spicy. No, Sakura said through her tears. It tastes like someone cares, like home should taste, but better than home ever did. Betty Lou pulled her into a hug. Oh, honey, war makes us forget we're all just people trying to take care of each other. Governments make enemies, but grandmothers, we just want to feed people, doesn't matter what uniform they wore. That night, Sakura taught 5 other women how to make biscuits. They worked together in the kitchen, laughing at flour-covered hands at misshapen lumps that barely resembled proper biscuits. For 1 hour, they weren't POWs or enemies or shameful survivors. They were just women baking bread together. And it felt like freedom. On September 10th, something unexpected happened. A pickup truck pulled up to the camp gates. Out stepped a man in his 60s, weathered-faced cowboy hat, dusty boots. His name was Tom Rodriguez. His family had ranched land near Camp Lordsburg for 3 generations. Captain Edwards had invited him as part of a cultural exchange program to let the prisoners see real American civilian life beyond the military. Tom brought his horse Cisco, a gentle paint mare with patient eyes. Through the translator, he addressed the gathered women. Ladies, I know y'all have had a rough time. War's hard on everybody. But I wanted to show you something about the American West, about freedom and open spaces. He offered the reins to whoever wanted to try riding. The women hesitated. In Japanese military culture, women didn't ride horses. It wasn't considered proper. But Hana stepped forward. The nurse who'd seen too much death, who'd spent years following rules and watching people die for those rules. She'd dreamed of riding as a child, but was never allowed. Tom helped her up into the saddle, showed her how to hold the reins, how to shift her weight. Cisco stood perfectly still, old and well-trained, and infinitely patient. Just relax, Tom said. The horse knows what to do. You just guide her a little. Let her show you. Hana sat there for a moment, feeling the warmth of the animal beneath her, feeling the wind on her face, feeling the sun on her shoulders. Then she gently pressed her heels, and Cisco started walking. Slowly at first, then trotting, around the yard in a wide circle. Hana was smiling, really truly smiling. The kind of smile that comes from deep inside, from a place that had been locked away for too long. When she finally dismounted, tears were streaming down her face. I'm 29 years old, she said, and that's the freest I've ever felt in my entire life. Tom tipped his hat. My daddy taught me to judge people by their character, not their flag. Y'all got caught in a war you didn't start. But you're human beings who deserve respect. Remember that when you go home. And remember Texas showed you kindness. He rode away into the desert heat, and the women stood watching until he disappeared. But everything changed on September 22nd. Yuki Tanaka collapsed during dinner. Her chronic leg infection, the one that had been treated weeks earlier, suddenly flared back with a vengeance. The initial treatment hadn't been enough. The infection had gone deeper than anyone realized into the bone. Her fever spiked to 104 degrees. She was rushed to the camp infirmary, delirious and fading fast. Dr. Robert Hayes examined her quickly. This is serious. The infection is in the bone, osteomyelitis. We need emergency surgery to clean it out or she'll lose the leg. Maybe her life. The surgery took 2 hours. Modern American military medicine at work. Anesthesia, so she felt no pain. Sterile instruments, skilled surgical hands. And most importantly, penicillin, the miracle drug that Japanese forces never had access to throughout the war. Rin and the other women waited outside the infirmary. Hana explained the medical situation quietly. If we were still in Japanese service, Yuki would die. We had no capacity for this kind of surgery in field hospitals. No penicillin, no antibiotics at all. I watched soldiers die every week from infections exactly like this. We told them it was honorable to endure suffering, but it was just preventable death. Our commanders chose pride over medicine. When Dr. Hayes finally emerged exhausted but satisfied, he said, surgery successful. The penicillin should clear the infection completely. She'll recover fully. Another week without treatment, and she would have lost the leg. 2 weeks, and she probably would have died from sepsis. When Yuki woke hours later, she saw Americans surrounding her bed. Dr. Hayes checking her chart. Nurse Clara adjusting her IV. Sergeant Miller standing by the door with a small bouquet of desert wildflowers. Rin holding her hand. You're alive, Rin said softly. The Americans saved your life. Yuki stared at her bandaged leg, at the clear tube feeding antibiotics into her arm, at the American doctor who had spent 2 hours saving an enemy's life. She started crying. Why, she whispered. Why save me? My country killed Americans. Why not just let me die? Dr. Hayes answered simply. Because you're a person and I'm a doctor. My oath is first, do no harm. That oath doesn't have exceptions for nationality. You needed help, I helped. That's all. The words were so simple, so direct, so completely opposite to everything they had been taught about enemies and warfare and the value of individual life versus national glory. That night, every woman in the camp wanted to visit Yuki. Captain Edwards bent the rules, allowed them to gather in the infirmary, even though it was crowded and probably violated some regulation. Hana spoke for all of them. I need to say something. I was a military nurse. I followed orders. We withheld medicine from prisoners. We let them suffer. I thought it was necessary. I thought it was war. But watching Dr. Hayes save Yuki, I realized we had a choice. We always had a choice. We chose cruelty and called it honor. But it was just cruelty. Rin added, maybe true honor isn't about making people suffer. Maybe it's about relieving suffering when you can. Maybe the Americans are showing us what honor actually looks like, and we just didn't have the right words for it. The women were changing. Each day, each act of unexpected kindness, each moment when Americans treated them like human beings worthy of dignity, it chipped away at the foundation of everything they'd been taught. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, they were building something new in its place. The question was, what would happen when they returned to Japan, when they faced a society that valued death over survival, obedience over questioning, collective shame over individual dignity? Could these changes survive contact with the old world, or would Japan crush them back into the shapes they'd been before? The answer would come sooner than any of them expected. But for now, in this small camp in the New Mexico desert, surrounded by barbed wire and watched by guards, 300 Japanese women were discovering something revolutionary. That your enemy could teach you more about honor than your own people ever did. That kindness was stronger than cruelty. That dignity mattered more than obedience. And that sometimes the only way to truly honor your country was to help it become better than it had been. That was the real war. Not between nations, but between ideas. Between honor as suffering and honor as dignity. Between culture as prison and culture as choice. And in that war, these women were becoming soldiers of a different kind. Not fighters, but bridges. Not destroyers, but builders. Not enemies of Japan, but its future. If Japan would let them be, September 25th, 1945. 3 weeks since the women arrived at Camp Lordsburg. 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. The desert was cooler now as autumn crept into New Mexico, but the tension in the camp was rising like heat from sun-baked rocks. That morning mail arrived. Red Cross deliveries from Japan. The first letters many women had received since capture. They gathered in the yard as names were called, hands trembling as they accepted thin envelopes that had traveled across an ocean and a continent to reach them. Some women received letters. Others received nothing. Their families too ashamed to write to daughters who'd survived when honor dictated they should have died. Rin Nakamura held her letter like it might explode. The handwriting on the envelope was her father's. Precise, careful, the hand of a teacher who'd spent 40 years shaping characters on blackboards. She opened it with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. Dearest Rin, I am grateful you survived. Tokyo is ruins. Your mother's grave was destroyed in the March firebombing. I could not protect even her memory. Fumiko is alive. She is with your aunt in the countryside. She was injured in a bombing but recovering. American occupation forces are here now. They bring food and help rebuild. They are not what we were told. But society is difficult. Those who surrendered face judgment. Neighbors whisper, former soldiers called cowards. I worry for you when you return. What will they say about a woman who lived in American camps? I do not know. But you are my daughter. I will face whatever comes. Return when you can. Your father. Rin read it 3 times, relief and dread in equal measure. Fumiko was alive. Her little sister had survived. But the warning was clear. Society would judge her, neighbors would whisper. She would return to a country that wished she'd died instead. Around her, other women read their letters with similar expressions of pain. One woman received word her husband had divorced her in absentia. A proper wife would have taken her own life rather than face capture. Another learned her family had held a funeral for her and would not acknowledge her survival. It was less shameful to have a dead daughter than a living one who'd surrendered. Yuki Tanaka, still recovering from surgery but insisting on being present, read her mother's letter aloud to the small group. We are grateful you are alive. Do not worry about us. We manage with what we have. But between those careful words, Yuki could read the truth. They were starving. Her father's school was destroyed. They depended on others' charity. And now she was safe in America, eating 3 meals a day, sleeping in a clean bed, while they suffered. The guilt was crushing. How do we go back? Yuki asked, tears falling on her bandaged leg. How do we face them knowing we live better as prisoners than they did as free people? Hana Watanabe had received a telegram days earlier about her brother. Lieutenant Takeshi Watanabe killed in action at Okinawa, June 19th. An honorable death defending the homeland. He died 2 months before the war ended. Died for an island that fell anyway. Died for honor that meant nothing when the emperor surrendered 10 weeks later. My brother is dead, Hana said quietly, and I'm alive. In Japan's eyes, he's the hero and I'm the coward. But he's dead and I'm alive. Which of us made the right choice? No one had an answer. On September 26th, Captain Edwards called a meeting with the prisoner representatives. Rin, Yuki, Hana, and Sakura attended. Edwards sat behind his desk looking tired. He'd been managing this camp for months, and the weight of it showed in the lines around his eyes. Ladies, he said through Private Chen's translation, the war has been over for 6 weeks. Repatriation operations are beginning. We expect to start sending Japanese prisoners home in October. Most of you will return to Japan by December. The words hung in the air. Return to Japan, to families who might reject them, to a society that valued death over survival, to neighbors who would whisper and judge and shame. Edwards continued, you'll be transported to San Francisco, then by ship to Yokohama. The Japanese government will process you upon arrival. Allied occupation forces will oversee the process. Then he said something unexpected. However, there is another option. Under certain circumstances, prisoners of war can apply for extended stay in the United States. You can petition for asylum if you believe you face persecution or danger upon return. It requires documented evidence, an American sponsor, and approval from immigration officials. It's not common, but it's possible. The room went silent. They could stay. They could choose America over Japan, safety over family, future over past. Sakura spoke first. What would that mean? Staying in America. It means you'd remain here while your case is processed, Edwards explained. Could take months, even a year. You'd need a job, a sponsor, proof you could support yourself. Eventually, you could apply for citizenship. But it also means you might never go back to Japan. You'd be stateless until citizenship was granted. Your family might never forgive you. That evening, the women gathered in the barracks to discuss the impossible choice. The debate was fierce, emotional, painful. Some argued they had to return. Our families need us. We can't abandon them no matter what society says. We're Japanese. We can't just stop being Japanese. Others countered, but our families already abandoned us. The letters prove it. Some of us have nothing to return to except judgment and shame. Sakura stood and spoke with conviction beyond her 19 years. I'm staying. I'm applying for asylum. My family disowned me. The arranged marriage I ran away from is gone. I have nothing in Japan except people who wish I were dead. But here, Betty Lou offered to sponsor me. She'll teach me cooking, help me find work. I can build a new life. Maybe I won't be Japanese anymore, but at least I'll be free. The words fell like stones into water ripples spreading outward. She was really going to do it. Leave Japan forever. Choose America. Yuki spoke next, her voice thick with emotion. I want to stay. God help me, I want to stay. But my parents are alive. They're suffering. They need me. I can't abandon them. Even if society rejects me, even if I face trial, I have to go back. They sacrificed everything to raise me. I owe them that. Hana said I'm returning, but not because I'm afraid, because Japan needs people who've seen another way. Japan needs women who learn that questioning authority isn't betrayal, that survival isn't shameful, that dignity matters. If all of us who change stay in America, Japan never changes. Someone has to go back and plant these seeds. All eyes turned to Rin, the translator, the educated one, the woman who'd stood up to Yamamoto and spoken truth when it cost everything. I don't know, Rin admitted. My father and sister need me, but Yamamoto will report me as a collaborator. I could face trial imprisonment. How can I help them from prison? Sergeant Miller, who'd been standing quietly by the door, spoke up. Rin, can I tell you something? My mother faced the same choice in 1920. Leave Japan for America or stay with her family. She chose America. She missed her parents every single day for the rest of her life, but she never regretted having the choice. That's what freedom means. The right to choose your own path, even when every option costs something. Rin thought about that, thought about her mother's words from years ago. Serve with honor, never bring shame to our family. But what was honor now? Staying when it meant prison? Leaving when it meant abandoning family? Or was honor something else entirely? The courage to make the hardest choice and live with the consequences. On September 30th, Yamamoto requested one final assembly. Captain Edwards approved it reluctantly. It was within Geneva Convention rights for cultural gatherings, but he stationed twice as many guards as usual and made it clear any violence would result in immediate isolation. 7 o'clock in the morning. The sun was just rising, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. The women assembled in the yard. Yamamoto and his officers stood on their usual platform, but this time American guards flanked them on both sides. Yamamoto spoke in Japanese, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, but this time there was something different in his tone. Desperation. He knew his power was slipping away. My countrywomen, we return to Japan soon. I ask one final time. Who among you will return with honor intact? Who will stand with me and face our homeland with dignity? This silence stretched, but it wasn't the fearful silence of 3 weeks ago. It was the silence of women who'd already made their decisions and didn't owe him explanations. Then Sakura stepped forward, not to comply, to answer. I'm not returning, she said, her voice steady and clear. I'm staying in America. Betty Lou is sponsoring my asylum application. I'm choosing freedom. The words hit like thunder. Some women gasped. Others nodded in quiet approval. Yamamoto's face went white, then purple with rage. Traitor, he hissed. No, Sakura replied. Free woman, there's a difference. Yamamoto spun toward the other women, his voice rising to a shout. And the rest of you. Will you follow this child into eternal disgrace? Will you abandon Japan for American comfort? Yuki, leaning on a cane from her surgery, said, I was dying. Dr. Hayes saved my life. I will not call my rescue shameful. I'm returning to Japan and I'll face whatever comes. But I won't lie and say kindness is a sin. And you? Yamamoto turned to Hana, the nurse who betrayed her profession by working with enemy doctors. Renounce, Hana's voice was steady. I watched Japanese commanders let men die rather than use captured medicine. I watched them choose pride over healing. The Americans taught me that medicine should serve life, not ideology. That's a lesson I'm taking back to Japan. Call it what you want. Finally, Yamamoto turned to Rin, you, the translator who cooperated too willingly, who laughed with enemy guards, who spoke English with enemy officers. You are the worst of all. Renounce your collaboration. Rin took a breath. She thought of her father's letter, of Fumiko recovering in the countryside, of her mother's grave destroyed by bombs, of Sergeant Miller's mother torn between two countries, of Betty Lou's biscuits and Dr. Hayes' steady hands and Nurse Clara's gentle questions, of Yamamoto's fist raised to strike and American guards stepping between. She thought about honor, real honor, not the kind that required suffering, but the kind that protected people. Lieutenant Yamamoto, she said, her voice carrying across the yard, I will return to Japan. I will face whatever consequences come. But I won't renounce what I learned here. I learned that asking if someone is okay matters. That questioning authority isn't betrayal when authority is wrong. That survival isn't shameful. That kindness is stronger than cruelty. You call this collaboration. I call it education. You say I betrayed Japan. I say I learned how Japan could be better. Yamamoto's hand came up. He took a step forward, rage contorting his features. But Sergeant Miller was already moving. He stepped between them, and this time his weapon was drawn. Not pointed at Yamamoto, but present, visible. A statement. Assembly over, Miller said flatly. Captain Edwards, these officers need to return to quarters. Now. As guards moved to escort Yamamoto away, he called out one final threat in Japanese. You think you've won. You think American protection lasts forever. But when you step off the ship in Yokohama, I will be there. I will testify against every one of you. You will face Japanese justice, and it will be severe. But even as he spoke, his power was breaking. The women didn't bow, didn't flinch. They stood straight, these 300 women who'd learned they had voices and the right to use them. What Yamamoto didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that his threats were already empty. December 15th, 1945. 3 months after the confrontation. 2 weeks after the first wave of prisoners departed. Rin Nakamura stood on the deck of a transport ship pulling into Yokohama Harbor. The journey from New Mexico had taken 3 weeks. Train to San Francisco. Ship across the Pacific. Each mile carrying her closer to home and further from safety. Japan looked different from the ship. The harbor was full of American naval vessels. American flags flew alongside Japanese flags. Signs in English everywhere. This wasn't the Japan she'd left. This was occupied Japan. Conquered Japan. Changed Japan. Processing through Allied checkpoint was surreal. American soldiers directing traffic. American officers reviewing paperwork. Rin presented her documents, including the thick packet Sergeant Miller had given her. Medical records, incident reports, photographs, documentation of everything that happened at Camp Lordsburg. The American officer reviewing her papers paused. Ma'am, these are excellent records. We're investigating abuse within the Japanese military structure. If you're willing to testify about your treatment by Japanese officers, contact this office. He handed her a card. War Crimes Investigation Unit, Tokyo. Rin stared at the card. War crimes. They were investigating Japanese officers for war crimes against their own people. The officer continued. You should also know several officers from Camp Lordsburg have been arrested. Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto returned to Japan with the first wave of repatriations in late October. He was taken into custody on November 2nd. He's been charged with abuse of military subordinates, psychological torture, and violations of military code. His trial begins next month. The world tilted. Yamamoto arrested, not her, him. All his threats, all his documentation, all his promised testimony. Worthless. The occupation forces had their own investigation, their own evidence, their own justice. And it was Yamamoto who faced trial, not the women he terrorized. Rin found her way to her father's house in the Tokyo suburbs. The neighborhood was partially destroyed. Some houses gone completely, others damaged but standing. Her father's house fell into the latter category. Walls, cracked roof patched with salvaged materials but livable. Her father was in the small garden, tending vegetables and soil mixed with ash and rubble. He looked older than she remembered. Thinner, grayer. War aged everyone. Father. He turned. For a moment he just stared. Then he dropped his gardening tools and crossed the distance between them. He embraced her tightly and she felt him shaking. You survived. You came home. That's all that matters. Inside, Fumiko was waiting, 17 years old now, with a scar across her left cheek from bomb shrapnel. They held each other and cried. 3 years apart. A lifetime of changes in 3 years. That evening after dinner of rice and pickles and the few vegetables father could grow, Rin told them everything. About the camp, about the Americans, about Yamamoto, about standing up and saying no, about learning that honor could mean something different than what they'd been taught. Her father listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I heard rumors. Other prisoners returned last week. They said there was a Lieutenant Yamamoto documenting collaborators, that investigations would follow. I was afraid. Today those rumors stopped, he continued. Yamamoto was arrested this morning. War crimes charges. Several women testified against him. The Americans are prosecuting him. He looked at his daughter. Rin, were you one of the women he abused? Yes, she admitted. He hit me for hesitating during translation work. He tried to make us ashamed for accepting American help. He threatened us constantly. Her father's face hardened with anger, rare for such a gentle man. Then I'm glad he is arrested. A man who punishes survival is not honorable. He is cruel. He reached across the table and took Rin's hand. I don't care what society says. I don't care what neighbors whisper. You survived. You came home. You are my daughter. Nothing else matters, Fumiko added quietly. Sister, I'm glad you accepted American help. If you had died to preserve honor, I would have no sister. I prefer you alive and supposedly dishonored than dead and supposedly honorable. The validation washed over Rin like clean water. Her family chose her. Over honor culture, over social pressure, over everything. They chose her, but society was harder. In the following weeks, Rin learned the reality of post-war Japan. Some neighbors avoided the Nakamura family. Whispers followed Rin when she walked to market. Former POWs were refused work by some employers. Can't trust someone who surrendered. Yet there were opportunities too. The occupation forces needed translators. Rin's English improved at Camp Lordsburg made her valuable. She was hired by ESCAP's Civil Information Office. Her job was translating documents about democratic reforms, new constitution, women's suffrage, labor rights, education reforms. One day in January 1946, she translated Article 14 of the new Constitution. All people are equal under the law, and there shall be no discrimination in political, economic, or social relations because of race, creed, sex, social status, or family origin. She remembered Private Chen's class at Camp Lordsburg, American women voting, divorcing, owning property. Now Japan was adopting those same rights. The changes she'd witnessed in America were coming to Japan. Rin reconnected with Yuki and Hana. They formed a support network with other returned POWs facing judgment. They met weekly, sharing stories, sharing strength, reminding each other they'd done nothing wrong. Yuki found work at a clinic using skills she'd learned from American nurses. Hana opened a small medical practice, treating patients with dignity, explaining procedures, asking permission before treatment. Revolutionary and traditional Japanese medicine. We're bringing American values home, Hana said, one patient at a time. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Sakura Yoshida was building a different life. She'd stayed at Camp Lordsburg through October, then moved to town when her asylum was approved. Betty Lou sponsored her, taught her Southern cooking, helped her find work. By 1948, Sakura had enough savings to open her own small restaurant, Southern Comfort Kitchen. She specialized in fusion cuisine Southern food with Japanese techniques. One day in 1950, a customer asked about her accent. I'm from Japan, Sakura said in fluent English now. I was a prisoner of war here during the war. The people of Lordsburg showed me kindness when they could have shown hatred. So I stayed. The customer was silent. Then my son died at Iwo Jima, killed by Japanese soldiers. Sakura froze, waiting for anger, but the customer continued, You're not the enemy. You're just a girl who got caught in a terrible war. Welcome to America. I'm glad you stayed. In 1952, something happened that would bring the circle of transformation full and complete. 3 women from Camp Lordsburg returned to America. Not as prisoners this time, not as refugees seeking asylum, as brides. They had married American servicemen stationed in occupied Japan, men they met through the slow, careful work of rebuilding a shattered nation, through medical clinics and translation offices and reconstruction projects, through the thousands small daily interactions that happen when former enemies must learn to see each other as human beings, first nationalities second. One of them was Yuki Tanaka. She had returned to Japan in December 1945, just as she'd promised her parents, moved back into their small house in a Tokyo neighborhood where half the buildings were rubble. Her father's school had been destroyed, but he taught children in makeshift classrooms between the ruins. Her mother worked in a community kitchen, stretching rice and vegetables to feed families who had nothing. Yuki found work at a clinic treating civilians. She used everything she'd learned at Camp Lordsburg, how Nurse Clara had asked permission before treating patients, how Dr. Hayes had explained procedures in simple terms, how the Americans had treated dignity as a right, not a privilege. Her Japanese colleagues watched her with suspicion at first. Where did you learn to practice medicine like this? Why do you ask patients if they're comfortable? Why do you waste time explaining what you're going to do before you do it? Because people deserve to understand what's happening to their own bodies. Yuki answered quietly. Because asking permission shows respect. Because I learned from Americans that medicine works better when patients trust their doctors. Some colleagues sneered. American methods, soft, weak. But patients started requesting her specifically. The young nurse who asks before she touches you. The one who explains things. The one who treats you like a person, not a burden. In 1947, the occupation authorities assigned an American Army medic to her clinic, part of the effort to rebuild Japanese healthcare infrastructure, to train Japanese medical personnel in modern techniques to bridge the gap between former enemies. His name was Robert Chen, Private David Chen's younger cousin. 26 years old, born in San Francisco, to parents who had fled China when Japanese forces invaded Manchuria in the 1930s. He spoke Mandarin at home, English at school, and had learned Japanese during his military service. A bridge between cultures, himself never quite fitting into any single world. The first day they worked together was tense. Yuki knew who he was. She'd seen his cousin David at Camp Lordsburg, the translator, who'd helped prevent violence, who'd understood the cultural weight of shame. She wondered if Robert knew about her. If he knew Japan had invaded his parents' homeland, killed Chinese civilians, destroyed cities. If he hated her for it. They worked in silence that first week. Professional. Distant. Yuki translated his instructions for patients. Robert demonstrated surgical techniques, showed her how to use the new antibiotics arriving from America. Then one day a patient came in, an old man with an infected wound, delirious with fever. Sepsis setting in. Without treatment, he would die within days. Yuki knew what to do. She'd seen this before. Dr. Hayes had saved her life from this exact condition. She knew the procedure, knew what medications were needed, knew the surgery that would clean out the infection. But her hands were shaking. I can't, she said to Robert. I've never done this surgery alone, only assisted. What if I make a mistake? What if he dies? Robert looked at her, then at the dying man, then back at her. You know what to do. I've watched you work. You're good, better than good, and this man needs you right now. But what if I fail? Then you fail trying to save him, Robert said. That's better than letting him die because you were afraid. I'll be right here. I'll guide you through it. But you need to be the one to do it. He's your patient, your country. You're the one who's going to rebuild Japanese medicine, not me. The surgery took 90 minutes. Yuki's hands steadied as she worked. Robert talked her through each step, calm and confident, never doubting her. When it was over, the old man was breathing easily. The infection cleaned out, antibiotics flowing into his system. You just saved his life, Robert said. We saved his life, Yuki corrected. No, Robert said firmly. You did. I just stood here. That was all you. After that, something shifted between them. They started talking during long night shifts at the clinic. About medicine at first, then about the war, about occupation, about trying to heal a country that was broken in more ways than physical. Your cousin David was at Camp Lordsburg, Yuki said one night. He translated for us. He helped protect us when our own officers tried to hurt us. I know, Robert said. He wrote me letters about it. About these Japanese women who were caught between two worlds, who had the courage to question everything they'd been taught. He said you were one of them. Yuki was quiet for a moment. Were you angry that he helped us after what Japan did to China? Robert considered that. I was angry at governments, at militaries, at the men who make wars, but angry at scared women who got caught in something they didn't start no. That would be like blaming you for what happened to my parents. You didn't invade Manchuria. You were probably a child when that happened. I was 7, Yuki said. I didn't even know where Manchuria was. Exactly, Robert said. So why would I hate you for something you had no control over? They fell in love slowly. Over late-night conversations about impossible choices. Over shared meals of rice and pickled vegetables. Over hundreds of small moments when they chose to see the person instead of the nationality. In 1951, Robert asked her to marry him. Not with a dramatic proposal, but with a simple question after a long shift at the clinic. I'm going back to America next year when my service ends. I want you to come with me. As my wife, if you want. Yuki thought about her parents, about her obligations, about the guilt she'd carried for years, knowing she'd lived in comfort while they suffered, about honor and duty and all the reasons she should stay. But she also thought about Camp Lordsburg, about choosing truth over tradition, about Sergeant Miller's words. That's what freedom means. The right to choose your own path. Yes, she said, I want that. They married in Tokyo in May 1951, a small ceremony in a rebuilt chapel. Rin and Hana attended, both of them crying with joy. Robert's parents came from California, meeting their new daughter-in-law with open arms despite everything history said they should feel. A Chinese-American man marrying a Japanese woman in American-occupied Japan with a Buddhist, Shinto, Christian ceremony that honored all three traditions. The war had ended in more ways than one that day. Yuki moved to San Francisco in April 1952. The day the ship pulled into port, someone was waiting at the pier, Sakura. 7 years after they had knelt together in the desert, dust terrified and ashamed. 7 years after they had stood together and said no to Yamamoto. 7 years after they had learned that survival was not betrayal. They saw each other across the crowded dock and ran. You came back, Sakura said, crying and laughing simultaneously. Not back, Yuki replied, tears streaming down her face. Forward. I went to Japan first, took care of my parents until they could manage, stayed until my father's school was rebuilt and my mother had steady work. Then I chose this, on my own terms. That's the difference. They opened a small clinic together in San Francisco's Japantown. Yuki handled medical care. Sakura provided meals for patients who were too poor or too sick to feed themselves properly, both of them serving a community of Japanese immigrants who were like them, caught between worlds. And when new arrivals came from Japan in the 50s and 60s, confused and frightened and unsure where they belonged, Yuki and Sakura were there. Two women who had walked that path already. Two women who could say with absolute certainty, you can be both. You can carry two countries in your heart. You can honor your past and choose your future. You can be a bridge. Freedom looks different for everyone. Yuki told a young Japanese bride one day, a woman who just arrived in San Francisco and felt utterly lost. For Sakura, it meant staying in America from the beginning. For me, it meant returning to Japan, first honoring my obligations, then choosing to leave again when the time was right. For Rin and Hana, it meant staying in Japan permanently and changing it from within. We all made different choices, but we all got to choose. That's what matters. That's what freedom means. The young woman looked at the clinic around her, at Yuki in her white coat, speaking perfect English with a gentle Japanese accent, at Sakura in the kitchen, making soup that smelled like home but tasted like somewhere new, at photographs on the wall showing a desert camp in New Mexico where everything had changed. How do you stop feeling guilty? The young woman asked. For choosing yourself, you don't stop feeling guilty, Yuki said gently. You just decide that guilt is worth it, that living your life is worth it, that freedom is worth it. And eventually, if you're lucky, the guilt becomes something else. Pride. Not for abandoning your culture, but for carrying it forward in a new way. She touched the photograph on the wall, the one of Sergeant Miller standing between Yamamoto and the kneeling women. These Americans taught us that protecting people is the highest form of honor, Yuki said, and we're teaching that to others now. Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, all of us who live between worlds. We're building something new, something better than what was before. That's how you honor your past, not by staying trapped in it, but by using it to create a better future. In 1947, 2 years after leaving Camp Lordsburg, Rin Nakamura received a letter, American postmark. The return address was New Mexico. Her heart raced as she opened it. Dear Rin, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted you to know that Sakura opened her restaurant here in Lordsburg last month. It's wonderful. She makes the best biscuits outside of Georgia. Betty Lou is very proud. I also wanted to tell you something important. Last month, I visited my mother's grave in California. I told her about you and the other women at Camp Lordsburg, about your courage standing up to Yamamoto, about choosing truth over silence. I think she would have been proud. She spent her whole life trying to bridge Japanese and American cultures. You're doing the same thing, just from the other direction. I heard you're working as a translator for democratic reforms in Japan. That's exactly what I hoped for, that you'd take what you learn and use it to help your country become better. Remember, you don't have to choose between being Japanese and carrying American values. You can be both. That's what makes you powerful. You understand both worlds. Stay strong, stay true, and know that what happened at Camp Lordsburg mattered. You mattered. The stand you took mattered. Your friend, James Miller. Rin kept that letter, read it many times over the years. In 1975, she received another letter from America. Not from Miller, but from his daughter. Dear Mrs. Nakamura, you don't know me. I'm Sarah Miller, James Miller's daughter. My father passed away on March 17, 1975, from cancer. He was 58 years old. He spoke about you often in his final weeks. Before he died, he asked me to send you something. Inside the envelope were photographs. Camp Lordsburg, 1945. American guards, Japanese women working, eating, healing, and one photograph in particular. Sergeant Miller standing between Yamamoto and the kneeling women. The moment everything changed. There was also a letter in Miller's handwriting, his final words. Rin, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I wanted you to have these photographs. Evidence that what we experienced together was real. That kindness in wartime existed. That enemies became friends. I've thought about Camp Lordsburg often over the years. About you standing up to Yamamoto. About Yuki recovering from surgery. About Sakura choosing freedom over cultural obligation. You women taught me something important. That courage isn't just fighting in battles. It's questioning the things you've always believed. It's choosing truth over tradition when tradition hurts people. My mother would have loved you. You became what she was, a bridge between worlds, someone who carries two cultures and enriches both. I hope you're doing well in Japan. I hope you helped change things there, even in small ways. I hope you never regretted speaking the truth that day. Thank you for showing me that protecting people is the highest form of honor. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your friendship. With respect and gratitude. James Miller, Rin cried. She was 54 years old, 3 decades removed from Camp Lordsburg, but the memories flooded back as if it were yesterday. Miller had carried those memories too, had valued them, had wanted her to know they mattered. She framed the photograph of Miller stepping between her and Yamamoto, hung it in her office above her desk. Below it, she placed a quote she'd written herself. True honor is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Everything else is just obedience wearing honor's mask. By 1970, Rin Nakamura had spent 25 years working for women's rights in Japan. She'd helped establish women's shelters. She'd advocated for domestic violence laws. She'd taught young women that questioning tradition wasn't betrayal, it was evolution. One day, a young woman came to her office. Mrs. Nakamura, my husband beats me. My family says I must endure for honor's sake. But I read about you, about how you stood up to authority during the war, how you chose survival over shame. I want to do the same. Rin looked at her and saw herself at 24, caught between two worlds, afraid but determined. Then do it, Rin said. Choose yourself, choose safety, choose life. That's real honor. Anyone who tells you otherwise is confusing cruelty with culture. The woman left with resources, with support, with hope. Meanwhile, in Lordsburg, New Mexico, Sakura Yoshida Martinez, she'd taken her husband's name when she married an American veteran in 1952, stood in her restaurant. It had become a local landmark. People drove from 3 states to try her fusion cuisine. She hired immigrants, taught them cooking, gave them chances, just like Betty Lou had given her. One day, a Vietnamese refugee asked, "How did you do it? Come to a country that was your enemy and build a life?" Sakura smiled. "I learned that your enemy isn't always your enemy. Sometimes they're just people on the other side of a line someone else drew. And sometimes crossing that line is the bravest thing you can do." The story of Camp Lordsburg Japanese women POWs isn't in most history books. It's not part of the standard World War II narrative. But maybe it should be, because this story teaches something more valuable than battle strategies or political decisions. It teaches that war doesn't have to destroy our humanity if we choose to protect it. It teaches that your worst enemy might become your greatest teacher if you're brave enough to learn from them. It teaches that culture can evolve if you're courageous enough to question it. The 300 women who passed through Camp Lordsburg faced an impossible choice: loyalty to tradition or embrace of transformation. Many chose transformation. Some returned to Japan immediately and became agents of change from within, translating documents, treating patients, teaching young women that questioning was not betrayal. Others, like Sakura, stayed in America and built new lives, carrying their Japanese heritage into a new world. And a few, like Yuki, did both. Returned first to honor their obligations, then chose to leave again years later, this time not as prisoners but as brides, as immigrants, as people who had earned the right to decide their own path. All of them became bridges between enemies and friends, between tradition and progress, between the old world that demanded they die for honor and the new world that invited them to live with dignity. The American personnel faced their own choice: treat prisoners as enemies to be punished or as humans to be protected. They chose protection. And in doing so, they demonstrated American values more powerfully than any propaganda could have. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. These forgotten moments of history deserve to be remembered. Share this video with someone who served, with someone who cares about human dignity, with someone who needs to hear that kindness is stronger than cruelty, that truth is more powerful than propaganda, and that enemies can become friends if we have the courage to see their humanity. Leave a comment below. Have you or your family members encountered former enemies who became friends? Do you have stories of cross-cultural understanding that changed your perspective? Share them. These stories need to be told. In the end, the women of Camp Lordsburg teach us this: freedom isn't just about escaping physical prison. It's about escaping the mental prison of shame, obedience, and cultural conditioning that tells you you're not worthy of dignity. True honor isn't about dying for your country. It's about living well, treating others with compassion, and having the courage to change. And sometimes, just sometimes, your enemy can teach you what your friends never could: that you deserve better, that you're worth protecting, that your voice matters, that you are free. This has been the story of 300 Japanese women who learned that the enemy could be kinder than their own people and who had the courage to never forget it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. These stories matter. These lives mattered. And the lessons are eternal.